Hi, I'm Stina, and I'm excited being part of a global open standards community, making a positive change for billions of internet users. The technology we provide and have contributed to FIDO Alliance is tiny but mighty. Today, it protects the leading internet companies running our digital world. It also is used to secure vital infrastructure for nations, first responders, democracy in election campaigns, and free speech for journalists and dissidents around the world. In this keynote, I will talk about my favorite topic, keys. But let's look first at another security challenge that faced our society more than 60 years ago. Let's go back to the 50s, when there were no seatbelts in cars. With the promise of freedom and speed, happy car drivers hit the brand new highways, but many of them never returned home. Nils Bolin, Chief Safety Engineer at Volvo in Sweden, featured in the picture to the right, was tasked to make cars safer. The following slides summarize the 10 steps that turn his invention into a global security standard, saving millions of lives. The first step was to acknowledge the problem. As the number of cars and speed increased on the streets, so did fatal accidents. Nils Bolin had a previous career in designing safety solutions for fighter pilots in the military. But he realized that for a safety belt to be accepted by the everyday user, it could not be the clunky and complicated harnesses used by pilots. With the objective to make the belt quick, easy, and comfortable, he created the 3-point seatbelt. And to make it available and to protect all cars, drivers, and passengers, he led the way, making it into a global open standard. And once implemented, the results were clear. Seatbelts resulted in fewer fatal accidents. And the fact was then shared with drivers, car manufacturers, health organizations, and governments around the world. And the governments, they responded by making seatbelts mandatory in all cars. More car manufacturers implemented seatbelts, and that helped to drive awareness and adoption. And third-party security labs started testing and measuring the safety for different cars. As the market demand for safer cars increased, more car manufacturers started innovating around security. And we got crash zones, airbags, blind spot indicators, the beeping sound to remind us to buckle up, and many other security features. Today, we have all taken action. We all use seatbelts. And the good news is that while there are 10 times more cars than in the 50s, there is a smaller total number of fatal accidents. The same 10 steps for car security has and will be used for FIDO adoption, starting with acknowledging the problem. Just like cars, the internet was not designed for security. And the biggest risk, causing the vast majority of all internet security breaches, are due to stolen login credentials and phishing attacks. In the past, there has been a trade-off between great security and great user experience. Not only static passwords, but two-factor authentication solutions based on one-time password, phone authentication apps, and SMS are today being hacked at scale. In order for great security to scale, it has to be easier to use. In 2008, Yubico launched the world's first authenticator that works in a simple touch and without readers, drivers, or client software. We named our invention the YubiKey with the goal to enable one single security key to any number of services. To make it happen, we expanded our team from Sweden to San Francisco Bay Area and eventually to Seattle to work closely with the internet platforms and browsers and create a standard that everyone can benefit from. Together, we co-created a set of new authentication capabilities that resist credential phishing and man-in-the-middle attacks. And today, this is the foundation for the FIDO and WebAuthn standards. Hardware with strong crypto. Secrets are stored on a separate security chip with no connection to the internet, using strong asymmetric cryptography where only public keys are available outside the chip. Origin-bound keys, Once a user registers a FIDO authenticator to a service, is bound to the original URL and cannot be tricked to log into a fake website. User presence. The touch sensor on the security key verifies that the person logging in is a real human behind the computer and not a Trojan or a remote hacker. And now, the crown jewel of Yubico inventions. Many apps, no shared secrets. FIDO security keys work with any number of services, a corporate cloud service, a personal bank account, or a government service, with no shared secrets between the services, enabling high security and high privacy at scale. Multiple key registration. A common attack for many two-factor authentication technologies is to target weak backup and recovery processes. With FIDO, services can allow multiple authenticators to be registered to a single account. To ensure I can log in from anywhere, I keep one YubiKey and FIDO authenticator in my computer, one on my keychain, and one at home in a safe place. Native support in all leading platforms and browsers, offering integrity from end to end and a seamless user experience across Windows, Mac OS, Linux, Android, and iOS. Whatever features, what really matters are the results. And since launch in 2014 in G Suite, FIDO security keys and YubiKeys are loved by millions of users and hated by hackers. Last year, Google published a report that clearly demonstrates the power of YubiKeys and FIDO standards. Of the 350,000 users tested, it was only FIDO security keys, in this case the vast majority being YubiKeys, that delivered 100% account protection, while one-time passwords, push apps, secondary email, SMS, and phone numbers did not. But there were not only security benefits. Millions of hours and dollars were saved via faster logins and significantly fewer support calls. Now we are on our education mission, sharing these great results and facilitating adoption by offering free open source servers, software tools, and technical support to integrators and developers and service providers all over the world. We communicate and we collaborate with users, developers, online services, OS and cloud platforms, browsers, nonprofits, and government agencies around the world. Governments have an important role setting up rules and regulations safeguarding their citizens. And leading government standard bodies around the world are starting to recommend FIDO authenticators. We also welcome and nurture competition to safeguard choice, adoption, and the wider range of use cases. These screenshots show some of FIDO authentication options currently available by Google, Microsoft, and Okta. At Yubico, we have built trust as an innovator and by being transparent with challenges. Unintended or intentional weaknesses are the threat to any security initiative. Security certifications from FIDO or other government agencies do not cover all aspects of security in supply chain. To build long-term trust, security issues must be managed and disclosed responsibly. Also, for service providers to make their own choice of what authenticators can access their systems, we recommend implementing direct attestation, which is part of the FIDO and WebAuthn standard specifications. Moving ahead, we will see new, great, unexpected ideas and use cases rise from the YubiKey and the FIDO and the WebAuthn inventions. Today, November 2020, Yubico is excited to welcome a limited number of customers and partners to our YubiKey Bio preview program. We will continue to innovate and improve the security and usability of FIDO standards, including for passwordless logins and new enterprise use cases. We're also excited to see the open standards expand from authentication to payments in IoT, and deployments combining FIDO authenticators with identity proofing for scalable, high secure, and privacy-preserving online protection. So what can we learn from Mr. Boleyn and the seatbelt when developing security solutions for the internet? An internet that we all love and are dependent of, until we get our digital life and identity smashed. A proven solution is to implement FIDO and WebAuthn standards. And Yubico is happy to offer a WebAuthn starter kit for any organization that wants to try it out, making online authentication open and as easy and intuitive as the 3-point seatbelt. Bring it out, click, go. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your help making the internet safer for all.
Hello and welcome. I'm Christopher. I'm Yubico's CTO. This is a quick video to show you the experience of what it's like for someone who's been attacked in the same way that dozens of large companies have been attacked recently. And while there are many things one needs to do to protect against determined attackers, we're not going to cover all those here. We're just going to show how different authentication options hold up against attacks like those in the news recently. I'll give a little background and then show the experience from the perspective of a victim of these attacks. So a little background on phishing. These attacks are a type of social engineering, which is a fancy way of saying tricking people, called phishing, spelled with a PH, which is the use of deception via electronic communications like email or instant messaging, SMS, or telephone, in order to steal information like usernames and passwords or money or access to systems. So this is not new. These things have been going on for a long time, as far back as the 90s against AOL accounts, and they've been getting better ever since. Now, the style of lure, or the style of deception that is used in order to perform a phishing attack can vary a lot, but will oftentimes seem completely normal. The email exchanges or phone calls will perhaps come from an employee in your organization who's already been compromised, or will seem to come from an employee. They'll know things like start dates and employee numbers and telephone numbers and titles. Oftentimes, the experience is so smooth that the victim doesn't even know that they were phished. So you'll oftentimes hear this phrase multi-factor authentication, and we got a few examples of that here that I think most people are going to be familiar with. And sadly, not all types of multi-factor authentication are up to the task of preventing modern phishing attacks, and we'll show you how that works in a few minutes. The short story is that pretty much everything on this page requires the user to know and confirm things that they would have a hard time doing without being very, very careful all the time, which none of us are prone to do. We have incentives that make us want to do work or get home for dinner or whatever the case may be. And I'll show you how WebAuthn is different from these other things. Some of you might have not seen a YubiKey used before, and the experience is very simple. I thought I'd show it very quickly. You type in a username and password, you insert a security key like the YubiKey, and then you either touch the device, or if it's a phone, instead of inserting and touching, you'll tap the device on the back of the phone. It couldn't be simpler, and it makes a huge difference. So in the news recently, these recent attacks were against hosting providers, cryptocurrency-related sites, Twitter, and a host of others, and the attackers weren't advanced nation states in this particular case. They were a teen in Florida and a couple of other places, but they did their homework. They knew the things that we talked about earlier about employees and about VPN servers and those sorts of things. I'll provide all these links so you can read more about them later. While these were teenagers, they actually knew what they were doing and were effective in their work. And we'll move on and now show you what that might have felt like from the perspective of somebody being phished. On to the attacks. As I mentioned, these aren't anything new, but previously manual work was required to create lookalike templates for various websites, and now there are automated proxies available that make that much easier. I used one by Kubernetes, and I think it was a wonderful experience. It allowed me to experiment and make a lot of changes and make the experience much better for my phishing attacks fairly easily. The links to that tool, as well as to the talk that he did, which you should go look at if you want to see more about the attack side of this, are available below. I used GitHub as an example, not because they're specifically doing anything wrong, but because as a technical person, I spend a lot of time on GitHub and am familiar with how it feels and how to do work there. So I'm going to focus on one example throughout, and it's something most developers are quite familiar with. That's triaging an incoming issue that somebody reported. So here's me looking into an issue that somebody reported without being phished. I click on a link, I'm given the information that the person sent to me. Not too bad. So now I'm going to click on that same link, but it's been replaced with a phishing link. It feels just like the GitHub sign-in page. I'm going to type in my username and password, And just like before, I will get directly to the information that the person sent to me, and that's exactly what I expected to happen. So I may not even know I was phished. So that's a little scary that that could happen. So now I'm going to enable two-factor authentication. In order to do that, I get this dialog that asks me to confirm my password. Remember this, because it's another technique that attackers could use to make things feel much more natural. So it takes me a second to get my password in there. Once I do, I'm prompted to set up 2FA. I'm going to use an application. Pull up my phone. Don't worry, these codes are already burned. I've removed them and re-added them. I have to hit copy in order to continue. But then I hit enable. I scan this QR code with my mobile phone, and then I type in the code that it shows me on the phone, and so the GitHub knows that I've saved it. And after that, I click enable, and now I have two-factor authentication. Wonderful. I'm safe, right? Well, let's go back to the issue that I was looking at previously in this GitHub repo, and I'll click on one of the links in there in order to be phished. And this time, you'll see that in addition to the username and password, just like before, I have to get prompted for an OTP. Well, you know, the user's expecting to authenticate here, and maybe they'll give a little bit of pause, but likelihood is they'll type in that OTP code no matter where it came from, over SMS or from an app. They still get back to where they expected, so they probably don't know anything happened. There's some variance on this, so I know the user's username, so I'm going to pre-populate it. So this feels even more natural. Of course, it works just like before. I type in my password. It's going to ask for the 6-digit code. And after that's done from my mobile app, I'm in. Again, more likely that I won't know I was phished if it knew my username. You remember that dialog from earlier where the username was pre-populated, so we're going to, the username was missing. So we're going to use that technique now. And now this, I could modify the text to say, type in your password to continue instead of sign into GitHub fairly easily. But I didn't, so now we get the two-factor authentication code, and several different ways you can see the look and feel can change quite easily in order to fool the user into thinking that they were protected. So now we're going to go in and add a YubiKey to our account security settings and see what kind of difference that makes. It's fairly easy to do. You go to your account security settings, you click add, you scroll down to security keys, you register a new one, you can name it whatever you like. I'm going to call this one YubiKey. So we plug in the YubiKey, we touch it as we showed previously, and now we have a YubiKey registered. So what does phishing feel like when you have a YubiKey on your account? We're going to choose that link that has the username pre-populated. We're being phished right now, but we don't know it, so we type in our password, click sign in, and then we're asked if we'd like to use our YubiKey. Of course, we click use YubiKey, and I stick in my YubiKey, I touch the YubiKey, and you can see it says it didn't work. And the reason that it didn't work is that the YubiKey and the computer are talking to each other about what domain you're actually on. And see, now I'm pointing out that you're not actually on GitHub, you're on not GitHub. It has a valid security certificate and all of that, but there's a trick. If you don't disable other factors, you can always, as an attacker, have somebody enter their OTP code. So it's very important that you go in and set it up so that only YubiKeys are allowed. In GitHub, this is possible through corporate SSO solutions, but not on personal accounts. GitHub doesn't have a push notification based option. Some other sites do, but I thought I'd show you how this would work as well. On the website, you would get a button you press to send the push notification, and then on your phone, you'd pick it up and unlock it, and you'd get this notification that says, do you want to allow access? And of course, you'd type yes, because you just told it that you wanted to log in. And the only way you'd be able to spot the difference in this particular push app is if you happen to know your IP address versus the attacker's IP address. This is even harder to spot than people looking at the URL bar. And then finally, just encourage people to read the evidence out there. Google produced a wonderful study that showed what happened to their employees after they deployed YubiKeys. They were able to log in faster. They didn't have any account takeovers from phishing, and they actually reduced support cost overall. So hope this gives you the perspective that you need in order to evaluate different options in the face of modern phishing. And it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Be safe.